impression that these people play football. And it doesn't, you don't ever have to actually say that. Or if you do finally say it, it's not a surprise, like, where did football come from? You can use dialogue to kind of lead into these things, or to bring things off with little pieces of accent or word phrases. Several times in the first one, one of the characters has a very close to eidetic memory, not perfect, but very close, and while other people in her group are running around trying to get information, she's just listening to people and then puts it all together and just tells it in their accents in an order that seems right, and has all the information everybody else couldn't find because they weren't asking right. So
I think that that's interesting that you think in images and had trouble with dialogue, and somebody thinks in dialogue was able to translate that into images, and those three could help each other. That's very interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, that helped me a lot. Susan sick. But it helped me a lot, and after that point, before that, dialogue was just something extra on a page. I didn't realize it could be actually useful. Then I went back and reread some of my favorite books and discovered, wow, that really is useful.
Oh, that is useful.
So I actually make, one of my editing passes is to go back and see how much I can change into dialogue from images that are written.
It's a pretty famous trope that most of Hemingway's biggest books are dialogue and very little exposition, which often makes it hard to read because you have to remember who was saying what 20 pages ago.
Right. Well, I'm not a fan.
And he turned out to be
I like Old Man on the Sea, but I'm not really a fan of Hemingway otherwise.
I would like to just, I'd like to say, I admire, there are writers that you like, there are writers that you are envious of, and ones who you admire. And I admire Colleen because she's a master constructionist. She takes these small things and creates whole worlds that are complex but not convoluted, are challenging and fun but are not hard to read. And I admire that because that's something that I've not been able to do well yet. Dialogue I can do. The imagery, not so much. And you're really, really good at it.
Thank you.
Where do you draw the inspiration for the worlds that you create? Are there other authors that you find inspiration? Movies, TV shows, things happening in the world?
There's not a lot of TV shows that I watch, but I am a fan of Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, both of which I read the series before they made the TV show. Well, the Game of Thrones, the last one didn't come out until after, but so yeah, I have read them still. My world isn't completely, all happy gory, but it's not as gory as, say, Game of Thrones. Not as gory as Game of Thrones. Oh boy. What I do, one of the places that I went to class about writing with was, I went to the Odyssey, I competed into the Odyssey Fantasy Writing Workshop. They take 15 to 16 people a year. And it took me 3 years to manage to get into it. Had to write a new story for it each year to try to get into it. And I paid a lot of attention to the feedback that came back on the first 2 years and was able to squeeze in on the third year. Literally, I was called and said, we had somebody drop out, you're at the top of the waiting list. And I said, yes. One of the things that Jeannie Cavalos talked about there was, she's an author, an editor, numerous things. She used something called the strangeness budget, and we're talking about speculative fiction, which is fantasy, science fiction, horror, and the various genres that are similar or crosses between those. when you're reading and you run across you have a strange pond. There's something weird about the pond. The water is strange colors, or there's weird mists or whatever. And then you have things that happen around it. Maybe to the frogs that are from it, but there are more normal things that happen with this strange area. Or you can have a perfectly normal pond and 16 really strange frogs. But you can only really do one or the other, because beyond that it starts to get too difficult. Some of Philip K. Dick's work, he's a science fiction writer, he has some really strange places, and Harlan Ellison also. They have some really strange places that are their settings, and then some even stranger characters, and they're really difficult to follow at times. So it usually works out best if you do, one thing being strange, either your landscape and stuff being strange, or your people being strange. One or the other. Sometimes they so. Let me see what else I have in here. Just the things I want to read.
Maybe would you like to read? If you want, do you want to stand or sit?
I can stand. That's why the lumber's still sitting there. Okay, the first thing that I want to read, I have 3 short answers. Very short. First thing that I wanted to read is the teaser page for Here As I Am, for the upcoming one. And this is part of the inciting incident. Nicholas and Alon grabbed a pair of hooked poles and trotted along the shoreline. The smooth swells that slapped the docks became waves that crashed on rocks. Nicholas watched the waters pull back and swirl away, only to join with the next oncoming wave. Are you sure you want to do this? I mean, the waves look pretty intense and you don't swim that well. Alon put his pole in the water and vaulted across to a boulder, then reached into the relentless current with his pole toward a box wrapped with a leather belt. He wrestled with it, the box pulling at him. Nicholas, help me. The current is too strong. Nicholas turned. Alon balanced precariously on the... My eyes are not cooperating here. Alon balanced precariously on the last part of the boulder, then skidded across the wave, lost his balance, and fell slowly toward the water, arms windmilling, lost. The splash was almost lost in the sound of the waves crashing and smashing against the boulders. Alon bobbed to the surface, splashing and spitting water. The current dragged him away at frightening speed. Nicholas tossed his pole aside and gathered his power, intending to shift to dragon form underwater and save his friend. He dove into the water as a rogue wave caught him and slammed him back into the rocks. Stunned at the freezing temperature of the water, he lost his gathered power. The waves jerked him this way and that, rolled him under twice for good measure, and smacked him into a submerged boulder. He blacked out for a second, or was it a minute? He just knew that he needed air. Head aching, he could barely open his eyes. A hand dropped into the water and grabbed his shoulder, yanking him sideways. Alon clung to the floating box. Stay awake, Nicholas. I need you to stay awake. So that gives you an idea of the inciting incident in the next book.
You can change into a dragon.
Yes, he can change into a dragon. That's part of being a dragon. Let's see. Some of you have heard this before. I'll let you know my granddaughter's comment on it afterwards, when she was 7. The March wind swirled with old leaves and new snow. Talia flipped the tangled mess of her hair back from her face. She should probably brush it again one of these weeks. She shook her head. Summer came in a few more months. She could just cut it off with Mama's old knife again. Cut it off with Mama's old knife again and grow it. She poked a long stick into the leaves and dug down when she felt something hard. She came up with a cast-off deer antler, thick at the bottom and 3 points on the top. Only a few nibbles chipped the bottom. What a find! She tucked it into her bag, into the leather bag that hung from her shoulder. The blacksmith loved good antlers. They made excellent knife handles. He might even pay her for it, or at least deduct part of the money she owed him for investigating her brother's murder. Someday she would find the hunter with the star-shaped scar. She passed through the edges of the meadow. Ducking down near a raspberry thicket to dig, she caught sight of a pair of spotted thorns, half buried in the leaves. She smiled and waved at them. This time her digging produced 2 matching antlers, each with 5 points and untouched. The next hour she added 3 more antlers to her bag, all of them badly nibbled. If the deer and the other animals nibbled at the cast-offs, it meant that they were getting ready to grow this year's antlers. This would be her last collecting trip for the year. The forest and meadows would soon be far too dangerous to travel, mostly because of the ugly horses. Thin-legged and thick-necked, they walked with their heads drooping down. Only the youngest foals walked with their heads up, and that changed when they shed their baby coat. Talia was lucky enough to see an ugly horse pawing through the snow at the edge of the meadow before it saw her. A second stood nearby while a black and dark brown spotted foal nursed. She tossed 2 of badly nibbled antlers in their direction, just in case, but they ignored her. Shaggy clumps of matted winter fur hung from the adults' bellies. She glanced around to see if the rest of the herd approached, but they were likely still by the river at this time of year. She headed back to the meadow. The crunch of dead leaves sounded off to the side. She slowed for a moment, then continued as she identified the pattern of human footsteps. The hunter's bow, a quiver of red feather arrows, and a pretty set of matched knives stood out against his green and brown clothing. He caught up to her as she reached the rutted road back to the farm. "You, little girl, stop!" His voice sounded raw in the dry air. Talia kept walking, clutching her collecting bag close. With 4 sisters, her family needed the money that the antlers would bring. The younger girls kept a large vegetable and herb garden that helped during the summer, and the apples and grapes helped in the fall, but the early spring, antler collecting allowed Talia to buy the medicines that their father still needed. The herd caught him last summer on a too sunny day. "I told you to stop." The hunter laid a hand on her shoulder. "What do you have in your bag?" "It's mine." She curled over the bag and hugged it. Could he be the one? The hunter jerked the bag away and dumped it on the ground. All 4 remaining antlers fell out, as well as some leftover moss that Talia found hanging from a tree. "What is this? No money, no weapons, and too small to be of use. Why did you put these in your bag?" "Antlers make nice hilts for knives." She grabbed her bag back and carefully wrapped the moss around the antlers as she placed them inside. "Do you wander these woods a lot?" "Enough, but I need to get home." He blocked her path. "Have you ever found anything else out there?" "Pretty feathers from the birds, but that won't be until summer." He narrowed his eyes. "What about a unicorn's horn?" Talia looked up at his neck. She spotted the scar and smiled. "Do you mean a long, twisty horn from a white horse?" She drew her hands apart, tracing a spire with one finger. "Yes, that's exactly right. Did you see a unicorn?" He practically danced with excitement. "No, but I saw a horn once. My brother found it. He took it into the city to sell it last fall, but he didn't come back yet." But he couldn't, could he, she thought. "Where did your brother find the horn? Can you show me?" "He found it in Grandpa's old trunk, along with some rusty swords and armor." Talia prattled on like her youngest sister. "Grandpa caught a white unicorn and gave it to a king a long time ago. The king killed it a week later. Silly king." "And where did your grandfather catch it? Near here?" "No, silly, in the mountains. It took him almost a year. That's what Papa says." "Oh, well, did you see any deer while you were collecting?" "No." She drew out the word as she looked over her shoulder at the forest trail. "But I know where they are." Talia started to cry. "If I tell you, then you and your friends will just kill them." He patted her lightly on the shoulder. "No, I'm all alone, little girl. I won't kill more than one." She pulled her arm away. Hot tears stung her eyes, tears of rage. How dare her brother's murderer pat her the same way her brother used to? How arrogant this hunter, coming all alone. Worst of all, he kept calling her little. She was short, yes, shorter than most of her younger sisters, but she was no fool. She looked at her footprints in the snow. "Do you promise?" At his nod, she continued. They stayed down by the river. If you go across the meadow, there's a trail that goes a couple of miles through the trees. I'm not allowed to go that far, so I only went part way down it. At least I haven't wasted a trip. He turned and headed back toward the meadow. I'll bring you back an antler if I find one. Talia forced a smile as she continued up the road to the farm. He wouldn't be back. Her grandfather told her father the secret of the ugly horses, and Papa told her. They need to eat antlers and bones to grow nice, strong horns each year. Once they cast their spiral horns and start shedding their winter fur, they start hunting. They'll eat rabbits and deer if they must, but they really like the taste of human flesh. And Grandpa brought back a lot more than the rare albino that he gave to the king. A small herd, just enough to keep the deer under control, lived in the woods now. She wondered if the hunters' knives would rust before the next time it rained, when the ugly horses didn't hunt or eat. The blacksmith might pay her extra for such a pretty matched set. And my 7-year-old granddaughter, when she was 7 and going to skating lessons, knew that I was writing a unicorn story when she went into the lesson. When she came out, she wanted to read it. She read it and looked at me and said, Grandma, I prefer my unicorns to be vegetarian. So that's in Night Breeze and Moonbeams. And I think I'll need to stop here because my knee is getting into trouble.
Thank you, Colleen. Any questions for Colleen now that she's read some of her stories?
I'm just thankful for her sharing some of the craft of writing. That's really nice.
What was that?
It was nice for you to share some tips with the craft of writing. That was really nice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Honestly.
Well, I look at the page that has, that I circled all the ones with words on it. I think, no, not so much skill. I keep making the same mistakes over and over. But I don't go back and correct them, at least.
We all do it.
Which is
Well, actually, that is skill, because a lot of people don't recognize their mistakes, and when they keep making them. To know to go back and correct them, that is skill.
Oh, I know. I sit there and I think, no, I didn't do it all this time. And then, as I showed you, orange, all over the place. Not as bad as one of the people at Odyssey looked at the manuscript for, Odyssey was in 2007, looked at the manuscript for the Robbins Quest. And she went and Susan Abel Sullivan, who passed last year from a heart attack. And it's a shame because she was such a good person, and she would find things and then show you how to fix them. Not just tell you it was there, and she'd show you. She took a random page out of the middle of the manuscript, and she used a bright yellow highlighter to circle every was, were, and had that was on the page, because those are real good markers for passive verbs. And there was 47 on a page of 250 words. That's 1 in every 5 words. She pulled another one out. It had a little bit. It had maybe 45. Another one out. It had 49. I was like, okay, I get it. But and I had to go back through the entire thing. At least this was between times that it was dying on one medium and having to be typed in again. So it got fixed. But it took a while. It did take a while.
Definitely a
We're the
craft.
better for it.
What?
We are the better for it.
Yeah.
We are absolutely the better for it, because Colleen has actually been my editor of choice for a lot of my books. And she can not only keep all the complicated characters and subplots straight and find any holes and things in them, but her keenness for wases and wers and too many hads she has good eyes for that. I remember sitting with her in the library going over one of my manuscripts, and she said, at first pass, this scene read really well. And then she said at second pass, all the hads jumped out at me. And it was in the voice of a 9-year-old girl, so I was concerned about raising the maturity level of her voice. And Colleen said you should eliminate some of those. And I said, which ones? And we literally went over it line by line in real time. Keep this one, take this one out, keep it here, let's change it here. And the piece was better for it, for Colleen's eyes, and I am really thankful for it.
Thank you, Denise.
Question back here.
Oh, yeah. When are you gonna give Haas his own book?
Haas shows up again in The Wizard's Daughter.
Okay.
He shows up again in Wizard's Daughter. And I may put him in a more forward position in Parrot's Prophecy. I haven't quite decided on that yet.
I just wanna know how he became the way he is. What happened to him?
Oh, that's a short story that's already written, but
Oh.
it's not a very good short story yet. It needs several passes.
So we gotta wait.
Okay.
But, yeah, I do have an origin story for him.
Kind of to tag on with Denise, when Colleen worked with me on my book, even all kinds of things. I mean, she's spectacular with like swords and weapons. That's just true. That's legit. But it was amazing how she could keep my voice intact. That's an art. That's a real great thing to be able to have somebody edit your book and keep your voice intact versus changing it to the editor's.
Well, I can't edit anything that is too close to my voice. I can only edit things that are a distinct, different voice.
But still, you're able to retain our voices, which was,
Well,
that's a skill. No, that's a skill. Agreed. That's good.
But I can't do it if it's too close to my voice, because then it's too likely that my voice will end up taking over. So I can only do it when it is a distinct other voice, and you do have, both of you do have distinct other voices.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Mike or Colleen today?
No, I just thought I should pay for some of this stuff. I've learned from Mike Markley how to actually tell my writing process, who knows what my writing process is. And honestly, the craft of writing for both of you guys is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I enjoyed hearing from both of you, learning more about your books and your writing, and thank you all for attending tonight. Our next Meet the Author event is at the end of October, so hopefully we'll see you then. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.